All right, now we're going to look at a couple of problems from section 9.5 involving graphing secant and cosecant. Okay, so just as we did earlier, we're going to factor out our b value. I left off the 2. So there's our b. So theta over, whoops, that should just be a theta, right? We factored out the 1/2. And we end up with there pi over 3. Okay, so our period for secant is 2 pi because it's the same as cosine. It's reciprocal. And so for here we go 2 pi divided by b, or absolute value of b, but it's positive, so we have 4 pi. And our phase shift will be pi over 3 to the left. Okay, so all right, so remember secant is the reciprocal of cosine. And cosine has zeros at the odd pi over 2. So that's where, in general, we would expect to find asymptotes. Right, so that would be negative pi over 2, pi over 2, 3 pi over 2. Okay, and there would be your period of 2 pi. But now our period is actually 4 pi. So that means I have to go from negative pi, and I would go to here. Instead of 2 pi, that would be 4 pi. So that would give me negative 1 pi, positive 1 pi, and then 3 pi right there would be 4 pi. And now this whole thing gets shifted pi over 3 to the left. So again, if we're looking at this in thirds, this is 3/3, so we're going to go 1/3 to the left. So that would take us to negative 4 pi over 3. And then this goes 1/3 to the left, which would be 2 pi over 3. Right? And 4 pi in terms of thirds, right? That's 12 pi over 3. Half of that is 6 pi over 3, right? And each one of these is half a period. So from negative 4, add 6, we get to 2. And then from 2/3, 2 pi over 3, we're going to add 6 pi over 3, and we get 8 pi over 3. So there are the asymptotes. We'll find the midpoints. Between 2 and 8 is 5. Between negative 4 and 2 is negative 1. And because of that 2 there, right, we know we're going to 2 and negative 2. Oops, I put it on. That point should not be on the axis. That's over there at negative pi over 3. And so we have that, and then over here, we have that. And there is one period of that secant graph. Okay, for cosecant, remember it's the reciprocal of sine. Again, factor out the b. And we end up with 3 pi over 8. Okay, so period again. Period for the parent graph is 2 pi, so we're going to divide that by b, we get pi. And our phase shift will be 3 pi over 8, but now to the right. Okay, so in drawing our graph, let's see, I know I'm going to have more on the positive, so let me move that over a little bit. Okay, so for sine, remember we would normally have the zeros, and I'll draw that down here. Okay, sine has zeros at 0, pi, 2 pi, right? All the pi's. And that's where you would normally have asymptotes. So you would have an asymptote at 0, at pi, at 2 pi, okay? Now, because our period is pi, this will get reduced, right? From this first half of that would be to pi over 2. And then instead of 2 pi, this would go to pi, right? Because remember, within 2 of these, you're going to find 1 cycle, right? Because 2 of these is where you find 2 or a cosine or sine period. So now we have a phase shift of 3 pi over 8 to the right. So a little bit easier with sine because we start with one of our asymptotes at 0. So we're going to move that over 3 pi to the right. And we're going to go pi over 2, which is 4 pi over 8. That'll take us to 7 pi over 8. And then another pi over 2, right? Because between the 2 pi over 2's we get to pi. And that would take us to 11 pi over 8. We find our midpoints. That's 5 pi over 8 and 9 pi over 8. Okay, we put in our asymptotes. Again, our A value is 2. Hit that at that midpoint. Oh, that should be -2. And then at that midpoint. All right, so there's a secant and cosecant graph. I hope that it helps you, and we'll see you soon.